The situation at Wits University main campus in Braamfontein, Johannesburg is still tense due to student protests. Students have been protesting since Monday. They are demanding that the university provide student accommodation and the students with historical debt be allowed to register. Let's cross live to Wits University and speak to the spokesperson, or are we speaking to we're speaking to the university spokesperson, Shirona Patel. Shirona, thank you very much indeed for your time. Earlier, when we spoke to an SRC representative, she told us that operations were brought to a complete halt. Is that true? What's the current situation?
So this morning we had a group of about 50 students who blocked entrance into Yale Road. This prevented staff and students from coming into the university via the main gates. We did allow access through all the side gates, so we managed to get people onto campus. Lectures did start a little bit late, but we had a first round this morning. However, we are getting reports now of some of the lectures being disrupted on the West Campus in Braamfontein. We have now brought on additional security and the police to try to contain this group of masked individuals who are trying to disrupt lectures. From the university side, we don't believe that this has anything to do with accommodation or historic debt anymore. We believe that these are demands that are being made and that they're political demands being made. We believe that the students or the protesters are heeding the call of the South African Union of Students, and that is for them to shut down campuses. We were told that if they take down Wits, the rest of the country will follow suit, and I think that's why they're really trying hard to shut us down today. So we believe that it's politically motivated and not really anything to do with historic debt or accommodation at this stage.
But are you saying that there's no issues with regards to accommodation and historical debt?
No, as we said in previous days on SABC, with regards to historic debt, students are demanding that anyone who owes the university 100,000 rand or less be registered. Now, that's simply unaffordable for the university. If you take 1,000 people times 100,000, you can work out the sums. That would put us into financial debt and we'd have to close down. With regards to accommodation, we've got 6,700 beds available. The demand is for 13,000. Remember that accommodation is not subsidized by government, and students are demanding that anyone who registers be funded by the university for accommodation. So there's no way that we can afford to pay for every single person who requires accommodation at Wits. What we have done, though, is we've established a 13 million rand Wits hardship fund, and out of that 13 million rand, we've managed to help 567 students in the last 2 weeks. Those are people who've arrived on campus, who have had nowhere to go, who require urgent accommodation. We've managed to house them. We've managed to give money to people to re-register for this year. That is those people who owed historic debt to the university, and we're still processing people from those funds. The SRC sits on that committee, so we're not sure why they're protesting at the same time as we're trying to help students.
Just talk to us about this hardship project that you have, this initiative that you have. How does it work exactly?
So we've put aside 13 million rand. That's over and above the 1 billion rand that we administer in 5 financial aid scholarships and bursaries every year. So that's 1 billion rand that we're giving to students for financial aid scholarships and bursaries. Out of that, about 100 million rand comes from the university's council budget. About 25,000 students at Wits are on some form of financial aid scholarship or bursary. On top of that, we've now created a Wits hardship fund, which is 13 million rand, which we're using to help students who need accommodation urgently. So that's students who basically have registered but have nowhere to stay. They don't have a place to stay in Johannesburg. They may be from a place that's far away. And we've negotiated with private service providers in the area for us to pay for these beds at a reduced rate. And we're now accommodating students in there. So we've managed to help 567 students with regards to re-registering for this year, as well as accommodating students in and around the area. I think this is more than most universities in this country have done for students.
You know, we've been seeing similar scenes in other institutions as well, year after year after year. What is the solution to this problem? How can we put pay to scenes such as this?
Well, we can't put the responsibility on universities only. Universities aren't profit-making institutions. So we actually need the higher education, we need national government to come to the party like they did for the so-called free education and come to the party. Now, if you take Wits, for example, we've got 37,000 students, more or less. Out of those, only 5,500 are on NSFAS. That's a National Student Financial Aid Scheme. We've got a large chunk of people in the missing middle who can't afford to pay for their own fees but who don't qualify for NSFAS. And those are the people who have this historic debt. So what we need is when the government promised free education, it was only for people who had a household family income jointly of 350,000 Rand or less. We need that number to be increased at least to about 600,000 or more to help students in the missing middle. So that's one thing that can happen. The second thing is that in terms of accommodation, government and higher education should come to the party. We should be working with the provinces to look at all the derelict buildings in and around Johannesburg to see how that can be converted into student accommodation. We've reached out to provincial government, we've reached out to the city, but it's time, I think, for a national response to the issues around accommodation. This is not something that universities can afford to resolve by themselves. It's just too expensive.
You know, Shirona, when you hear about students going on a hunger strike, does your heart reach out to them and understand where they're coming from?
Absolutely, but I'd also ask journalists to ask the students about the hunger strike. So the university feeds 1,000 people every day on this campus through the Gift of the Givers scheme, through a food bank where staff, students and corporates donate food through tin foods, etc. And we've got a whole food garden which we're growing on the West Campus here, where students can grow their own food and harvest their own food and eat fresh organic food from the earth. So there are 3 programs going where we feed 1,000 students every day at our cost. So I think in terms of the hunger strike, yes, we do reach out to them. I'd also encourage journalists to ask the students about the hunger strike and how that's been going over the past few days. And get a perspective from them. So yes, our hearts do go out to them, but at the same time, we are making provision to feed 1,000 students a day at our cost, with no questions asked. We also allow students who don't have enough to eat, for example, to go into our dining halls. We just give them access via their card and they have access to food. So that's really something we've looked at in the last year or so.
Is the hunger strike not more so to make a point, you know, and try to get certain issues like accommodation and the debt issue resolved?
Absolutely, but again, we're at the wrong place. The university can't absorb that. So we've got a break-even budget. What that means is that we get 1/3 of our money from government, we get 1/3 of our money from student fees, and we get 1/3 of our money from third-stream income or donations and sponsorships. So the pot is just that big. We can't really say, well, we're going to let everybody come in for free. People don't need to pay student fees. They don't need to pay any debts that they own the university. How then do we pay for our utilities? How then do we pay for salaries? How do we pay for books? How do we pay? We've got 400 buildings to look after. How do we look after those 400 buildings? How do we pay for our academics to teach in classes? Where does the money come from? So either we need to get a bigger subsidy from government for accommodation or historic debt, or we need to find funding from somewhere else. We already raised the most in terms of funding from third-stream income, from donors, from private donors, from corporates, trust foundations. We are one of the universities in the world that do the most in terms of fundraising individually, aside from the state support that we get. But we can't do any more. It's a very difficult environment in which to fundraise given our economic situation in the country. So we are doing what we can. But in fact, the students, in terms of the hunger strike, etc., should take the strike to the doors of the people who can actually make a difference, who can fund accommodation, who can fund historic debt, and who can fund the missing middle at our institutions.
Shirona, we appreciate you coming on and giving us management's point of view. That was Shirona Patel, Wits University Management spokesperson.